The hunt for Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army continues. The LRA has been known to operate in northern Uganda, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the Central African Republic, and in South Sudan, with a campaign of human rights abuses against civilians. In May, one of Kony's lieutenants, Cesar Achalam, was captured. The LRA is hard to track, though. They operate with no mobile phones, radios, or online communication. One American satellite imaging company, GeoEye, is behind new technology that is allowing governments, including the US, to better understand the LRA's activity in that region. I've been speaking to Dr. Colleen McCue, who is Senior Director at GeoEye.
One of the tasks that we were given was to create a model of the LRA activity and attacks and then extend that model to identify locations where they would likely operate in the future. And one of the locations that we identified was CAR, which is the area to which the LRA has displaced since there's been the influx of resources into the region.
Right, that's Central African Republic. Now, I've been to that region, and it's very remote. It's extremely heavy undergrowth and triple canopy jungle, as they call it. How did your satellite observations contribute?
We use a combination of satellite imagery and then geospatial predictive analytics. And briefly, doing the geospatial modeling, we're able to take incidents and create statistical models of where they've occurred in the past and then extend it to new locations in the future. And as you've indicated, remoteness, lack of access to roads enables the LRA to have the privacy that they need to not only perpetrate the attacks, but there's quite a bit of work required in acquiring and managing the individuals that they kidnap. So the dense undergrowth and forestation gives them that privacy and concealment that they need to do the kidnappings and then manage these forcibly conscripted individuals.
It's not just the observation, not just the surveillance, is it, with GeoEye? You analyze, and that's where you make a difference. Tell us a bit more about that.
Again, we take incident data and we're able to create a statistical model. And a great example, a historic example of how this worked was in the mid-1800s in London when there was the cholera outbreak. John Snow, who was an epidemiologist, was able to create a map of the cholera fatalities. And it wasn't until he overlaid the location of the water pumps that they were able to realize what was going on. And the Broad Street pump in particular was associated with a large number of fatalities, and they were able to zero in on that, the role that that particular pump played in the epidemic. Similarly, when we model activity like the LRA, we're able to take historic incidents and then roll in the terrain, the geography, the forest cover. And in the LRA example in particular, we were able to pull in the location of IDP camps. And one of the things that emerged was the LRA has a preference for forcibly conscripting and kidnapping internally displaced populations, and then they also really like these remote areas. We've been able to validate these models with the humanitarian folks that are working in the region, and then the imagery, the satellite imagery, which is commercially available, so we can share it with foreign governments, we can share it with humanitarian workers, gives us that additional validation and insight. So we can look down and say, yes, there is heavy forest cover, or they are looking for these remotely located villages, and can extend our knowledge even further with that. So
the LRA would like to believe that they're untraceable because they don't use cell phones, they don't use HF phones, they don't use any kind of radio, that they're not on the electronic grid. That doesn't help them.
No, and I think that's why our work becomes so important. People generally have preferences for locations. There are places where we feel comfortable, places where we feel uncomfortable, and we tend to move through and interact with the environment accordingly. In the case of the LRA, they try to find these locations where they're relatively remote. They're off the beaten path, if you will. They have a lot of concealment. They're away from ordinary villages, places like that, and then they're close to their potential target population, which unfortunately are these internally displaced and refugee populations. So those are the types of areas that they like, and they tend to move to other locations that meet these criteria. So again, being able to create models of the areas that they prefer, we can then extend it to new locations so that we can move from chasing and reporting on them to actually getting in front of them, preventing attacks, thwarting, and changing outcomes.
That's Professor or Dr. Colleen McCue from GeoEye.